the stop.
My goodness, what a save!
What a save! What a glove save there by...
What a stop! Looked like a sure goal.
You talk about an A+ save and maybe the save of the night.
Welcome to the Goalie Science Podcast, the podcast where we try to bridge the gap between goaltending science and peak performance. I'm your host, Dr. Jamie Phillips, a physical therapist and goalie performance specialist. I'm joined as always by Dr. Ben Cernick and goalie coach Derek Fujian. Whether you're at home, at the rink, or in the car, grab a cup of your favorite beverage and let's drop the puck on this week's episode.
Welcome to another episode of the Goalie Science Podcast. It is Tuesday, February 18th. We just finished the last day of round robin play for the Four Nations Cup. I know your blood's boiling. Tell me, Bouger, kick it off with you. We've turned into the anti-Jordan Binnington podcast. So let's just get it out now for the listeners who are waiting for this.
I mean, the best Canadian goalie in the world right now, the best Canadian world goalie, or let's say the second best, arguably second, possibly best goalie in the world, is on the beach drinking Mahas and mojitos somewhere in Punta Cana, and we are subjective to watching Jordan Binnington give up at least one softie a game. And hey, they're in the finals, so if you're listening to this on Wednesday when it drops, then you know Canada and the U.S. are playing tomorrow in the Four Nations Cup finals, and it's Binnington versus Hellebuck. And who would you be more comfortable with in between the pipes?
You know how I know that life is a simulation is because those two guys were like competitors growing up, both 93s, one was the OHL draft, one for my job in Winnipeg, and now I have to watch, mind you, I'm watching from Naples, Florida, still drinking Mai Tais, so I can't complain. And before I go back to the snowy Michigan weather, but yeah, it's taking out some good real estate for my ego in my head right now. I'm not gonna lie about that one. It's today's podcast, and we'll introduce our guest later towards the interview. But we have Dr. Curtis Ackerman, who is a sports vision therapist. He's a optometrist, so he's an expert in what he does. He's very good. He runs Milton Sport Vision out of Milton, Ontario. But he is also on the anti-Binnington train. And so if you thought that, hey, this must just be the intro, they're going to let it slide because they've got it off their chest. It's funny to listen to someone who's an expert in the field talk about NHL goalies and the things he sees, because he's coming at a completely different avenue than us. But after our conversation, I was definitely more aware of Binnington's positioning and struggles. And I actually have to go back and watch some Samsonov stuff because I'm curious to see if that's something that's continued into his Vegas days.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'm a Leaf fan, so I've been on the Samsonov rant for a couple of years, and just how he, I call it missing your mark. Like, puck moves from A to B, you move from your A to B, and you miss your mark. And that's why, I tell all my young goalies, when they contrast the way Joseph Woll plays and the way Ilya Samsonov played the last 2 years in Toronto, one goalie looks like he's in control, being Joseph Woll, and that's because he's hitting his mark. He is positionally on angle. And Ilya Samsonov continuously missed his mark. So when he made saves, constantly having to reach and overextend and created a lot of problems for himself. And that's what I call missing your mark. But I mean, listen, Jordan Binnington doesn't care what we have to say about him. Jordan Binnington is in the finals of the Four Nations Cup. He is getting paid millions of dollars. He doesn't care what two schmucks, one currently in Caledonia and one previously living in Caledonia, care or say about him. So good on him. But hey, I'm Canadian through and through. You're one of those fake Americans and fake Canadians now. So you're hoping the Sweden won. But I'm hoping and I'm pulling for Binnington, even though I believe in my soul that Logan Thompson should be in net for us tomorrow night.
I do believe that. I don't know who to cheer for. Like I said in that group chat, I work with USA Hockey, bias there. Canadian, bias there. For pure content reasons, I do kind of hope the United States wins, because then we could just at least keep talking about Logan Thompson for another at least week. And okay, the less ideas we have to come up with on the podcast, the easier I life is. You had said something when you were talking about Wall right there about just being in control. This is, I guess, an advice question for some of our goalies and goalie parents is, I use a case study. I have a goalie who's really good, stepping in the junior, just shredded up AAA, and the biggest he's not he's a good skater, but he's not like jump off your page. Look at how unreal this guy's skating is, but he also doesn't need to be. So we've worked tirelessly to control the game, to minimize the amount of movement he has to do. So he's never not in position, and he's done a really good job. And that's why he's torn up one of the top goalies in AAA in the United States. However, he's not six. He's 6 feet maybe. My question is, and the issue I started to run into now that I'm on the phone with agents and teams and stuff, is he's having a hard time passing the eyeball test because teams think he's not powerful enough to play at the next level. And what was one of the feedback I got from an NHL? So he's not powerful enough to play at the next level, and he looks slow on the ice. When I watched all the practice footage he had from when he skated with that NL team, just beat everything at his feet. It just didn't slide at all in practice. Just everything was so controlled. So my question to you and my advice, or I'm hoping to get some advice for listeners, like what do you do and what do you say when trying to deal with that and help an athlete get his foot in the door if he's not fitting into the standard that a lot of teams are looking for?
Now, this feedback you're getting, is this from a head coach or is this from their goalie coach?
So it's from a goalie coach.
From a goalie coach.
It's just funny because the text message that I got, which was sent to the agent who sent it to me, was the exact opposite of his game. So part of me was like, I don't even know if you were paying attention or like, I don't know.
Okay. So this is generally what happens with the goalie coaches is they fall in love with skill set, number one. And you fall into this category too, is you love the way good skaters look. And you have a bias towards what they look like. And you see a kid and you train skating so much, and so do I, that when they look like a good skater, like that piques your interest. So when you take a kid who doesn't maybe look like that, it takes you a lot longer to be sold on him. Because when your first bias as a goalie coach, your first bias, if it's not what you see right away, hi Fran, then
For those watching on the YouTube, my wife was getting to periods dropping off some fluids. Thank you.
where was I? If your first bias isn't like, if you don't see that, if it doesn't jump off the page for you as a goalie coach, then you start to find the things that you don't like about a goalie. So I would assume that the guy who kind of made this report is there's a bias there that he likes and he looks for in all his goalies. And then this guy doesn't do it. So now he starts to pick apart the other things to support his bias. That's a mistake. Like that ends up hurting you in the results. And that's something that I did a lot when I was less experienced. I fell in love with technique. Like I really loved the way guys looked when they did butterflies, and that's something that goalie coaches do, is they fall in love with that technique, and then we forget to look at the other aspects of the game. And this is funny because, like I said, and I think I even said I said about a minute ago, I'm a Leaf fan. I love the Toronto Maple Leafs. Growing up Leaf fan, Felix Potvin is the reason I love goaltending. And when the Leafs had a little bit of they didn't do a run, but when the Leafs had Jack Campbell as their number one goalie, and Jack Campbell played very well for the Leafs. Do not judge Jack Campbell now that he's in Edmonton and kind of the way his career's gone with Detroit. When Jack Campbell was
in Grand Rapids.
Yes, whatever. Stop interrupting me. I'm spewing gold here. When Jack Campbell was in Toronto, he was very good. And he didn't pass the eyeball test for guys that love technique, right? So all my students, we sat around one day and I'm going to pull videos and we're going to figure out what makes Jack Campbell have success, because he's in the NHL and he's a guy who just 3 months later signed a 5-year, $5 million deal. Like, he was a very good NHL goalie, but he doesn't look like it. So what did the things that he do that made him successful? He was always square. He skated very, very, like, I would say below average. He didn't pass the eyeball test for your criteria of what a good skater looks like. He was awkward. He had a lot of C cuts. He had a lot of extra movement, but he was always square when the puck got shot, and he tracked the puck very well. So a lot of times goalie coaches out there will, if they don't see their personal bias right away, then they'll find the things that they don't like to support the bias that they have.
That makes sense. Because with the report I got, when I was reading it, I was like, man, we're obviously not looking at the same goalie, because it's one thing to be like, hey, I want goalies that are taller and better skaters. And I'd been like, hey, he stops every puck, but I get it. You want that type of goalie. But the things that you're saying were negatives, were things that I would be like, well, one, those aren't true. And two, I don't know. He's just really good at stopping pucks, but I can see that. I have put in when I do scout, I have tried to, I don't create like a hierarchy where the things that I would like to see, like really good skaters, tall, flexible, etc., where I'm starting to put them in a little bit of a lower category, just so that those are just basically quick check boxes, and I guess to put it, so be like, yes, 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 cool. And then I can start to look at other stuff a little bit more critical, so like trying not to get caught up on falling in love with technique. But it is hard because we see this and something looks so good. However, if you are recruiting or taking a goalie based solely on, how do they look? The most important part about being a goalie is, can they stop pucks? And so it's more about watching the way they actually do stop pucks to give you some insight on, are they solid goalies? So I was curious with that.
But you know what also too is, when you get that report back and he kind of lists the negative things and you're like, no, he's very good at that. That's also because you have way more exposure to him too. And that's where it's like a lot of discourse and like communication back and forth, to where it's like, you talking to whoever did the scouting report being like, you just have to see him longer, because after you are exposed and watch a guy longer, first you're going to pick up the things you don't like. And then after you see him more and more, you start to see things that you do like. That's why one-time viewing is not like, it's good, but the long forever phrase is like, first impressions are the lasting impressions, right? You only have one chance to make a first impression. That's true. And that's where, like, I've had conversations with AAA coaches, not on goalies so much, but on players, where I'm like, hey, you're going to run a tryout. This kid will fall down when you do all your skating drills. He will not be able to shoot the puck. He will not be able to handle the puck. You will watch him in drills, and you will be the first cut. This kid will be in your first group of cuts. And then after 25 games, he'll be your best player, because you're not going to see the things that you are going to fall in love with until you watch him play 20 times. And I had a perfect example of that this year. Same thing. Kid moved into AAA on that recommendation, and I got a text from that coach at Christmas. He's like, Booge, you are dead on. He's like, this kid is my best player. I love him. And he is the worst practice player you'll ever see in your entire life. Because, I mean, my bias was hockey IQ and like those intangibles that you can't teach. And I don't know why this kid has success, because I can't figure it out, but he just does. And you don't see that. And that's what makes scouting hard, and makes like weekend trial camps hard. If you don't see these kids 25 times, your bias is gonna overtake your perception.
Yes, agreed. What I also take that feedback to is, like, it also helps me be like, actually, so like when I see that, I'm like, okay, there are some things that I would like to improve upon, or can I tweak these so it helps him pass the eyeball test a little bit more? Easier said than done, because I'm not going to take something that's, his strength is his IQ and his ability to beat things on his feet, his ability to read the play. So I'm not going to tell him you need to be more explosive and have big, powerful pushes, because that's going to change his game. However, there are things that can be like, hey, like, we got to get stronger in the gym, so that when you get to these junior teams and you do off-ice testing, like, you need to be the strongest goalie in testing, so that they can't use that, hey, you're not explosive enough because you are stronger than the goalies. So finding different ways, and then like, hey, being stronger is going to help you just generally. So finding different ways to help get them in through it. I like, and what you said about the weekend tests. So this is something that USA Hockey and Steve Thompson has really put an emphasis on. Like when we do have weekend camps, finding the goalies who perform that weekend. And so one of the things that I'm asking about is, I don't necessarily agree with it. I don't disagree. I get the point where it's like, hey, in international tournaments, they're short-lived. And that's what USA Hockey is about. It's about performing well in international tournaments. We need goalies that are going to prepare on that day. However, again, it's hard to evaluate when you have someone with a massive body of work who maybe doesn't pass the IWL test that first day, or maybe just has a bad camp, but is an absolute stud of a goalie. It's almost like you have Logan Thompson, who's just put in a incredible body of work, and then Jordan Binnington was better than him on weekend. Who do you take? So that's something that we keep in mind, where there is value, a tremendous amount of value in both, where you can be very, very smart. Like example, you can be a very smart person, but if you don't show up on test day, you're not going to pass the class, that kind of thing. So there is value in both.
Yeah, but you know what? In hockey, you don't only write one test. You write 82 of them. So if you show up on test day and you aren't good on one, you got 81 more chances. If the body of work says you're good, you're good.
You're not wrong with that. So that's, again, that is a preference everyone takes for each their own. I kind of try to toe the middle of it. I try to go like maybe 70, 60, 40, 60%. What is your body of work? 40%. How did you show up when it matters?
What you mean is you sit on the fence so that everybody is happy with you and you can keep getting promoted in USA Hockey. And then you're going to be the president of United States Hockey, and you're going to bring in Swedish ideologies and Swedish pegs.
No, we are Swedish pegs would actually probably be my first order of business, just so that we have some pegs that work. Although those new cement pigs that I sent were pretty good. I need to try with some. This isn't a free ad, but I need to try them with some older goalies to see if they really work. But they did okay with my U14 girls. Yeah, no, I don't say the fence. I say what I think, whether it gets taken into consideration or not, because I'm very low in the total pool. But you know what? Shout out to USA Hockey, because we do have good conversations and discussions, and they are open to hearing everyone's feedback and concerns. I don't know what Hockey Canada does or what other international things do, but USA Hockey at least listens to when these are things. Because called Steve directly and I said this, and he explained it, and I said, well, I don't necessarily agree, but if this is the way that we're doing it, sure, let's find the best goalie that weekend and try to make sure no one else slips through the cracks. So it's the way it goes.
Coach, coaching lesson 101. When the boss says this is what we're doing, you say, yes, sir.
100%. And I like when the boss says, hey, we'll see how it works for the next few years, and we have to come back and reevaluate and go a different way. We'll come back and reevaluate. And I said, that's all I wanted to hear. We're going to cut to our interview here in a second. But before we do, let's talk about, do we have our parting shots?
Oh my God, my parting
interview parting shots.
How long do I have? I have a rant. Maybe we save it. Maybe we save it for the next episode, because I've had some battles the last day that if I do my rant, I'm gonna get heated. And if I do my rant, the people that I'm ranting about will know exactly who I'm talking about, and they are very good friends of mine, and I don't want to jeopardize any of those relationships. But anybody who listened to this episode, listen next week, because I'll let her all out.
Okay. So your parting shot was a teaser for next week. My parting shot was shout out to 2010 and the U14 and the U18 Fox Motors teams just won their national tournaments in Blaine, Minnesota. So shout out to all the goalies that played, and shout out to my two goalies that trained with me a lot personally, Mason Martin and Caden Mariga. Very good goalies, which is great. Now we have to go with states. Super weird how they do it. You have like a national tournament, and then you have a state tournament. It's not sequential either, but let's go beat Little Caesars because they're the best team of both those age groups. So let's go beat Little Caesars. So start with those guys. All right, let's come over to our interview with Dr. Curtis Aikman. This episode of the Goalie Science Podcast is sponsored by Milton Vision and Sports Vision Training Center in Milton, Ontario. Sports Vision Training is a unique field to help you play your best by training your vision and processing speed. At the center of their training, they focus on hand-eye coordination, reaction time, peripheral awareness, single and multiple object tracking, motor planning, decision-making, processing speed, and much more. Your eyes take in information from all angles, especially when on the ice. Their personalized process will help you execute movements more accurately and optimize your skills. To receive a 20% discount off your initial evaluation and 15% off a training block, mention Goalie Science when booking your initial evaluation. Once again, for 20% off an evaluation and 15% a training block, mention Goalie Science when booking your evaluation. Go to miltonvisionoptometry.com or click the link in the show notes to find out more. Now let's get back to the episode. Welcome to the Goalie Science Podcast. Dr. Curtis Aikman. This is take 2. I just deleted it. We weren't having a tough start, but Dr. Curtis Aikman is the owner of Milton Vision and Sports Vision Training Center in Milton, Ontario. Doc, welcome to the pod. Before we get into everything, can you just explain to the listeners and viewers here exactly what is a sports optometrist, what do you do, and how it applies to goalies?
Yeah, so what we do regular eye exams to get started. I do a lot of baseline measurements on how the visual system's functioning. We have a computerized eye tracker, have a Synaptech system. Behind me, it's a sensory station. So we're able to measure a lot of different visual performance metrics, how clear your vision is, how well you see in low contrast, what your depth perception is, hand-eye coordination, reaction time, processing speed, decision-making. When you move your eyes from one spot to another, do they move to the spot that your brain told them to, or do they kind of get lost on the way? And so we get a baseline of that, and then we combine that with some higher level eye examination, where we look at how the eyes are working together. And once we figure that all out, we look for deficiencies. And that's our starting point for the basic hand-eye goalie type training that everybody would think we do. And then after that, we look at incorporating the visual system more fully than just following a puck around the ice. So how to use your vision to understand what's going on around you, the pace of the play. If there's a 3-on-2 and you're watching the guy skate into the corner, your brain being able to process how quickly that third skater's coming in so that you understand where he's supposed to be, because you understand what systems the other team's running because you've been paying attention to it visually. Those kinds of things.
Pretty good. Lots of science already off the bat. But okay, so you are a sports optometrist, correct?
Yeah, I'm a sports vision therapist. Yeah.
Perfect. So I think the biggest thing is, there's a lot of different tools out there, different brands. What, you mentioned a bunch of things right there, but if you can simplify it for our listeners, what separates you from, let's just say, certain apps or programs or things that people can just download on their computer, their phone, and just do whenever they want?
Kind of like separating what you guys do to being in your driveway taking shots. There are apps out there that can train eye movement a little bit, and they can train multiple object tracking where there are little balls flying around a screen. Where we come in is, we do it with a purpose. We explain how it translates into the game. We're actually measuring for deficiencies and then training those. We also will take things that you're doing well at and make them better. When I'm doing my goalie training, we kind of reteach how to catch, how to use the visual system to lead the hands, as opposed to, just reacting to where the puck is going. We make it a process. We break it down. We slow everything down. We make it very, very intentional, and then we automate it. And then typically what happens is the reactions become much more accurate and faster and better decisions.
So I know
Something to say, but like my brain just went mush. Okay. Basically, so correct me if I'm wrong, but so your son was a goalie and he trained with me. And I think when you first started getting into the vision training for sports, is kind of like I was like a guinea pig. Like I had a group of guys that you worked with, and Jamie being like the first pro that went to work with you.
Right.
And from my experiences working with you, and now bringing my son to you because it's a huge difference when I brought him to see you, is you test the vision system and then work on the deficiencies and improve the strengths. Where if you're just doing something with an app, you're just generally doing something which isn't targeted towards what is going to make you better.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. We're really focused on eliminating any areas where the visual system, the coordination, we'll get kids that struggle with left and right, and it's not just knowing which one is their left or their right. It's when their brain sends a signal to push left, sometimes they don't, sometimes they go the other way. So we have to learn all of those things so that we understand, where to strengthen. You take a pro like Jamie, who, when I did his metrics, like I came into your goalies, I think we did 13 or 15 goalies in the first session, and like 70 or 80% of them had a significant visual dysfunction where their eyes were actually inhibiting their ability to train. So you guys are doing all this great work, teaching them how to get to spaces and how to use their hands and everything like that. And then somebody shoots and then their eyes aren't tracking the puck in properly. So like the goalies that we had come in, whether they were the top goalies or the kids that were just starting out, just by kind of reevaluating how they're using their visual systems and understanding where they weren't using them properly and then learning how to use it properly, we saw improvements pretty much across the board. Yeah, it's very tailored. Everything is custom. We can do group training like the apps to do general. We can make things better, but really my preference is to customize and give you the best result that you can get.
So you also work with other sports and other athletes, right?
Yep. Yeah.
So when you're doing testing, when you're testing goalies, generally across the board, what is the difference between, say, a goalie in their visual system and other athletes? Like, is there like a discernible difference between the way a goalie's visual system reacts and, say, a basketball player or a golfer? Like, what is the biggest difference between those athletes?
So the way athletes are trained generally, they talk about 10,000 reps to become an expert at something. With goalies, they spend a lot of time looking at one puck in training. So when we measure their ability to fixate on something that's stationary, not moving, is usually exceptional, 95th to 100th percentile compared to other athletes in any other sport, because they're really good at looking at something that's not moving. And then they're usually pretty good at tracking it. But when the motion starts to come in, that's where it'll separate the guys who do really well. And then some of the goalies where you're like, why is he having trouble making that save? He seems to move properly and get in position right. Yeah, Jim.
Oh, sorry for those listening and watching. We throw our hands, shift a heads up. We throw our hands up when we have a question. Say here's the next up. So we don't want to interrupt you, but keep going.
Okay, I get it. So when for example, I had a mother bring a volleyball player in to see me. He was in grade 11. The kid had stopped getting any playing time because he was really struggling. When we did his evaluation, I measured his eye alignment, straight ahead, but also in up gaze and in down gaze. With a goalie, there aren't too many things you guys are going to do that are going to be up here in a game. Maybe if you're down on your belly where you shouldn't be, you might need to track up from that, but that you're in rescue mode at that point. But for a volleyball player, the bulk of what they do is up here. And what we found was that when he looked up, his eyes split apart. So imagine trying to track a ball and your eyes are looking in different directions. So when we trained him, we got his eyes aligned and functioning everywhere. We worked on his hand-eye coordination. He was on a really strong team. So he went from not playing to, 3 weeks later, his coach said, "Are you on steroids?" 5 weeks later, the coach said, "Keep taking the steroids." And then when they got to provincials, his mom came back afterwards and she said, he played every game of provincials. We had 3 universities scout him to play. So like the the visual demands of volleyball and a goalie, where you're tracking one ball that's moving and trying to get into position to react to it, are very similar, except the way the ball comes, the arc and things like that is very different to how a puck might come off a stick. You know, we've got to teach our goalies to track that puck, be ready for the puck movement, be patient. How do they be patient? If we can make their reaction time faster, then they can trust it. And then they can wait and see what's happening with the puck before they either drop or push or react.
So one of the things that, for those listening, I mentioned it earlier. So before Dr. Aikman opened his clinic, I was one of the first, I guess, pro athletes there, going to your house, doing everything, doing all the testing.
My office.
Yeah, and I noticed an immediate difference in, like, once we started to do the training and do all, like, for me, my homework, the stuff we were doing at your house. But the thing I probably noticed the most was when we went through that evaluation, there were things that I was like, weak and deficient in that I never in a million years would have been able to discern and figure out myself. I think the biggest one I was deficient in was multi-object tracking. And I didn't, when I look back at my game at that point, I was like, yeah, it makes sense. Like, whenever there were flash screens and things like that, like, I struggled to pick up the puck. It wasn't until those testings that I was able to figure that out. Now, for you, when you see goalies in general, because this is a goalie podcast, obviously, is there, out of your testing parameters, is there one that you see really commonly deficient among goalies?
You nailed it. Multiple object tracking. Getting back to our 10,000 rep piece, what do you guys never practice? Right? It's having.
If you actually train with Derek and I, we do practice screens, but you're right, screens.
No, not screens though. It's not just screens. Like, it's how the play develops. Like, most of goalie training happens 1-on-1 or maybe 2-on-1, where it's a shot. You're teaching muscle memory and reaction, and this is how you're going to react to a puck that comes low. This is how you're going to react to a blocker side puck. This is how we're going to direct it into the corner. This is how we're going to move to get into position to make that save. And the physical demands of a goaltender require that you guys put that much emphasis on doing that. And what does every goalie parent complain about? When they get into practice, there's no work on the goalies. Why do we care about that? It's not the shooting. Like, it's not target practice. They get their training is a lot of target practice type training. They don't get to see the play develop in front of them. Their visual system's never taught to follow the play coming in on them, other than when they're doing flow drills. And even that's not supernatural, because usually you don't have back checkers and things like that. So it's a skill that doesn't get practiced very much. Because how are you going to do that in a goalie session, really? Like, you're not going to have 5 guys coming in and out and the goalie having to keep track of where everybody is. So it's something that we can add on to the goalie training to say, okay, we're going to rely on our visual system to understand how the play is developing and use those skills that we've learned in our goalie training to apply that. So I know that there's going to be a guy coming back door because they're running a 2-1-2. The guy's going in the corner. I know visually I can use my peripheral vision, because now I'm being forced to open up because I've learned how to do that. So I'm tracking that puck into the corner. I'm seeing the player up here. I can't see the guy behind me because he's effectively behind my head, or maybe my mask, or maybe my defenseman's blocking it. But I know, based on how fast he's skating, where he should end up being, and I know where he's trying to get to. So when that puck comes across my crease, I actually know where to push before I push. And with my goalie training, I know how to push to get there efficiently. So I'm going to pivot it and push across, and I'm going to get to where I want to be accurately, instead of ending up in the corner, because I don't know where I'm supposed to be pushing to. One of the things that a lot of goalies struggle with is their visual spacing. That's something that we don't measure with the synaptic and those kinds of things. It's visual spatial orientation. So where am I in space? And you see, we were talking about Bennington earlier a little bit, and one of my favorites was Samsonov for Toronto last year. He was super athletic. He could, flip around and make a save, but he was always flipping around because he was never in his crease, because he didn't know where his crease ended visually. Like, if somebody had given him to me for an hour a week for 3 weeks, you would have seen his game calm down a lot. Like everybody likes a nice quiet goalie. You know, you look at Wall gets in there. He's beautiful to watch. He's always square. He's starting to get a little looser this year. I don't know if that's a stress point. Actually, I do know.
I mean, you are the expert, so
Yeah. So I can explain that. And this kind of ties into everything else. So when we're talking about like visual spacing, we use our peripheral vision a lot more than we think, or we should be. And that, Jamie, if you remember the one exercise that we used to do where there was a ball swinging and I would throw multiple balls at you and you'd have to process where it was coming and then pivot and catch it and then get back to the central target and pivot and catch. And so you were using your peripheral awareness to lead your hands, and then you'd use your central vision to track into where that ball was going, to catch it accurately and read what was on the ball at the same time. So we need that visual awareness to know what's happening around us. Now, one of the problems that's very specific to goalies that really impacts them more than a lot of people is that when we get stressed, our visual system naturally tunnels. We get into kind of a fight or flight mode, and the world just does this. So now, if you think of the rink like a black room and you got a flashlight, now you're trying to find the puck with a flashlight and you're trying to figure out what's going on around you. And that's where you see goalies throwing their heads all over the place, trying to see what's going on around them. When we open the visual system so that the peripheral vision gets integrated properly, then it's like turning the light on in the room rather. So now you can see the whole room without having to move your head around. You know, right now we're all sitting here looking at computers, but if you look at your computer, you can say at the same time, how far out can I see while I'm looking at the computer and focusing on that? And that's a skill that is tough to develop in a practice setting too much. You know, we work with things like fit lights where they light up, and, you know, a way to do that might be to have a couple of fit lights out wide and have the goalie running the play and call what color the light flashed up or something like that. But it's not really organic to do in a lot of other ways. So getting that peripheral integration helps you see where you are in the crease, helps you see where the play is developing, helps you understand where you are. And if you think about stresses causing you to tunnel and lose that, you know, you look at the guys in the NHL, it's all stress all the time. Now you back that out and you look at 8-year-old kids, where does the stress come from? Right? I know, like for me, like Colin trained. Colin was a natural athlete. He played with Cutter Gauthier and Red Savage when we were in Phoenix as a player. So those two guys are like, they played on Team USA. Colin was a really good player with those two. And we came up to Canada and he said, I want to be a goalie. And after I couldn't beat it out of him by taking slap shots in the driveway and he just kept getting up, I was like, okay, I guess you can, you know. But Colin responded really well to a lot of pressure when he was young. That's how he seemed to focus himself well. And I think, you know, as parents, we kind of learn to apply that pressure to our goalies, not realizing that as the goalies get older and they start to have more emotional responses to what we're doing, they start to tunnel in games and they start to lose their play. So you know, it might be a parent, it might be a coach, it might be different things like that. So even the young kids get a lot of stresses that can detract from their game. You're like, how come this kid isn't making this save? He used to make this all the time. The kid is probably stressed out and his visual system's probably super tunneled and he's losing all of his visual cues on how to make that save with the tools that he already owns.
So some of the guys that they struggle in playoffs or struggle in like high pressure games, you think a lot of that has to do with when they feel that external pressure, their visual system turns into that tunnel and they have a hard time widening their scope of view?
Yeah, that is. And it's not just the visual system, like it's your whole kind of essence, if you will. Like you just get really tight, you feel like, I don't know where I'm going, I don't know where I'm supposed to be. You start to stop focusing on stopping the next puck. You know, it's like, oh, what's going to happen? What's going to happen? The goalie's job isn't to know what's going to happen. The goalie's job is to react to what's happening. And when we tunnel, it's not just visually, it's kind of like the whole world tunnels on us. So the guys that look super calm, like actually Wall's a good example of that. You can see him after plays sometimes. He'll be mumbling something to himself in the crease, or he'll close his eyes and kind of reset himself. To me, it looks like he's kind of trying to bring his stress level back down to a flat plane and say, okay, I just had this really intense physical play that happened. The natural reaction to that is to have adrenaline, and the natural reaction to adrenaline is stress and tunneling. Our brain can't feel the difference between anxiety and anticipation. It's the same chemical response. It's how we teach ourselves to respond to it that tells us whether we're excited or if we're nervous.
Have you had any goal, like your athletes come in any sport, and sometimes we get an athlete, some of them are just like more calm, more relaxed, just general people, and then other ones are more agitated or just generally anxious. Have you seen noticeable changes off the ice with athletes when you've improved some of their visual aspects, or is it more the on ice performance changes?
So this gets in pretty heavily into the vision therapy part of what we do. If we pull the athlete out of the equation and just treat them as a kid, a lot of kids struggle moving through space because they don't understand their spatial relationships. They get overstimulated in their environments by what's going on around them visually. And, the easier one to see is the kids that get overstimulated by sounds, but it does happen to kids visually as well. So when we get their visual system functioning properly, and when we teach them, this is how the world is moving around you, and let them be more aware of it. Like in my practice, we do a lot of regular vision therapy as well. And we'll have a lot of kids who are like on the spectrum who have trouble integrating into their environment, where they all of a sudden they're calming down and they're looking around and recognizing that there are people that they're interacting with, and they'll start talking and engaging and making eye contact. And like and that translates just socially, but also athletically as well. We'll get a lot of parents comment that hey, Mike, I don't know what you're doing to my kid, but we had one kid that we were training. He was I think he was around 10 years old. And the mom came in after we did about 10 weeks of training, and she said, what did you do? It's like, what do you mean? She said, well, this week he started tying his shoes on his own. He started talking to people and pointing out everything that was going on around him. I was like, oh, now he's just seeing the world for the first time. He's been walking around like this all the time, not understanding that to look down and notice that his shoes are untied. And the same thing happens for a goalie, where if they get into that tunnel position, they forget about what's going on around them. There was a game, it was Toronto against Carolina, I think about 3 years ago, because it was Engvall. Engvall has one move, skates down the boards, comes around the back of the net, comes around the top of the circle and shoots on net. And that was his play. And he did that, and the Carolina goalie kind of tracked him, came around the net, tracked him to the other side, came up to the wing. When he got to the hash mark on the outside, the defenseman tapped the puck, and it stopped the puck. But as Engvall was skating, it hit his skate and it kicked back up to his stick in a weird way, like not a way that you would have expected. And the goalie lost the puck, and you could actually see him tunnel right away because his head started flopping all over the place trying to find where the puck was. And Engvall skated around the top of the circle, and he just slid it on the ice to the net. And when the puck went in, the goalie was standing looking up at the blue line like this, because he had no idea what had happened to the play. Now, when he stressed, he lost his peripheral information. So if he'd been open, he would have seen Engvall still moving, and he probably would have noticed that the puck was on his stick, and then he would have been able to prep himself and get into a proper reacting position. So even to the pros, it'll happen.
Yeah, I think when I look back and I notice the progress that I made, it was funny because every now and then, and Derek, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but you'd be like, Derek would say, oh, you've been working with Ackerman, because we go to skate and things were just a little bit snappier. And we always hear like, oh, the puck, today the puck appeared big, or I was seeing the game in slow motion. And for me, I think the biggest one is, the best way to compare it would be like, you're seeing the game in 720p, and all of a sudden you're seeing, after some training, you're seeing the game in 4K, where everything is just more vivid, more crisp, and you're able to process it. I think that for me, and the multi-object, where you went from this narrow vision, all of a sudden you throw on a wide angle lens and you see everything. But my question for you is, so we had another like a vision very popular goalie training vision product approach us. We tested it. our biggest problem we had within the reason we couldn't like go forward with some sort of partnership was the testing parameters were the same as the training parameters. So essentially we had the issue of we couldn't determine whether there was progress being made
You're training
truly.
tests.
Yeah, because you're training for the test. And if I have a test and I also have someone gives me all the answers to the test, I'll be able to memorize the test, right? I know like I've gone through yours, but for the viewers and listeners, what makes your testing protocol unique to those athletes in front of you?
I'm an eye doctor, so a lot of the measurements that I take are just things that can't be done by a computer. Um, the information that we do get from our computers is really good for baseline orientation, but in my training, I understand how to take that information and translate it into where are the deficiencies in the visual system, how to make it more personal for a goalie. Like, if you remember, Jamie, when I did your training, I asked you, where are you deficient? Are you struggling with pucks coming out from behind the net? Are you struggling with passes across the ice? And the thing that you told me was, what I'm really struggling with is I seem to do okay in games, and then when I get to practices, I have no energy left to get through a practice and keep focused on the puck. So I feel like that's hindering my development a bit. And so what we did, part of what we did with you was I super cognitive loaded you during our training. So we overstimulated your visual system. I gave you, you had to track, lights, with the fit lights again, we did green, red is right, green is left, right? And then we said, okay, we'll add yellow. And when the yellow flashes, you have to alternate between right and left. And then once you could do that, then we added green. So you had to alternate yellow, right and left, and green, right and left. And you had to keep track of those in your brain. So I was giving you stuff that was way more complicated than what you were going to run into in practice to handle kind of the issues that you would encounter, where you might feel a little bit run down. Meanwhile, your brain is saying, okay, yeah, I'm tired, but this is way easier than the other stuff that I had to do. When we talk about like hand-eye training, like with, we're touching lights and things, it's not about touching the light. I'll get guys that are really quick with their hands and they can get the lights, but their process is really inefficient. Like we really look at rebuilding the process and using the peripheral vision. So when I'm training that, so we have on the Synaptech, there's something where lights will pop up in random locations and you have to tap them as quickly as you can, quickly and accurately. And you can do that without looking at the lights, but it would be like, making a save and not tracking the puck in at all. Sometimes you might have to do that, but ideally you never have to do that because you're in position and you're tracking properly. So we train the athlete to say, okay, we're going to use our peripheral vision to say, where's the light? So where's that first light? It's down there. Okay. Your hand's going to start moving even before you turn your head to see it, but I want you to lock your vision in to get to that light. So we're actually retraining the basics of how to maximize your performance on that test. So it's a different approach. It's not training a result, it's training a process. And once we get the process good, like I get a lot of very type A goalies, like that's how you guys get really good. You're very focused on getting to that result, where it takes me a couple of sessions to retrain them from that and say, listen, we're going to go slow here. I want you to do this right. Once you can do it right, then you're going to go fast. And when you go fast, your score is going to go way up. It's not going to go up just a little bit. And I think that's the biggest difference between like something you might get from a keep tapping the buttons and then we're going to just measure tapping the buttons again kind of test.
So I got a question. This is like the debate of parents across the universe, probably. And me and Jamie's talked about it a little bit about it the last couple of weeks, and we're going to kind of investigate it a little bit further. But video games. Do video games on, say, a game day, do they help or do they hurt?
So back in the day when I was playing, midget and junior and those kinds of things, I was a gamer. Like
You can't say midget anymore. That's going to get canceled. It's now
Well,
it wasn't.
I would have been you something at that point. Um, it was contact, and I was big. So back in the day, I used to play a lot of Commodore 64 games, and what I found was that there was this 3D ping pong game that I was playing, and on the days that I played it, I was friggin' amazing in my games. My hand-eye coordination was like, I didn't understand that that's what was going on, but I knew when I played that game before, when I got to my game, I'd be in really good shape. So there is a little bit of benefit to certain kinds of games being used to prep, but you don't want to only do that. And the reason we don't want to only do that, everything's going to keep sounding the same I'm saying here. Let's say you're gaming on your phone. What are you doing visually? You're like coming right down into this little small space. You're tuning everything else out and you're locking in there. But visually, it's more than that. The closer we're looking, we're using what's called accommodation. So accommodation is using effort to flex the lens inside the eye to bring closer things into focus. So when we're in school or in a game, we're constantly changing our accommodation from near to far to keep accurate, clear vision on the puck at all times or on the board and things like that. When you're sitting on your phone, it's causing two problems. One, your accommodation is locked in. So now you're going to play hockey and your eyes are kind of potentially stuck at like a 2-foot distance or a 1.5 foot distance. And then the other problem is your visual system becomes less flexible when you're doing that. So you're going to have more trouble seeing from near to far. The third problem is when you're gaming on something that's flat, you're teaching your brain that these things that look three-dimensional are all in the same plane. So now your ability to judge that depth is kind of thrown off a little bit because your brain's learned to recalibrate. Like I'm seeing you right now, my brain sees that you're sitting in front of your pads in the corner and the wooden sticks in behind you. And my brain is assigning a depth to that. Now, when we're actually doing depth, our eyes are turning in and out to match that. So as I'm looking from you back to the wall, my eyes should want to turn out. But because you're in the same screen, my eyes are actually turned at the same distance all the time. So it's actually causing a dissociation of the visual system if we're doing too much of that. So
then what type of games should they play? Like,
yeah.
I found a correlation like with my son's preparation that if he plays, and if I give it about 20 minutes, it's kind of like my little if he plays 20 minutes of like Fortnite or Call of Duty, that he's played that. Now that could just be placebo. That could just be something that has just correlated because he's playing well. But is there something to that in terms of like they will help you? Because like everything you're saying about the screen and goalie's depth perception, all that makes sense. But the parents want to know. Like that is the number one question that I get all year.
If you're looking at it like a Call of Duty type game, what are the visual skills that would translate, right? So you're hiding behind something, you're trying to see around it. If you can shift yourself a little to the side, you get a different view. So it's kind of like looking around a screen. If you don't pay attention to the whole screen, somebody on the far side is going to shoot you, right? So you're trying to, so in your Fortnite, you're up on your big TV now. So you're not sitting at 3 inches or 10 inches or 20 inches. You're actually probably 10 feet away. The visual demand at 10 feet is very little. It's only about a quarter diopter to a half diopter. So it's a very small amount of accommodation that has to happen at that distance. So the accommodation system isn't being blown out. So now he's out there playing, he's getting really focused on one activity, and he's also trying to pay attention to other things that are going on around him at the same time. That's a skill that can translate to a game.
Does specificity, sorry to cut you off.
Yeah, go.
Because does specificity matter? So, if a goalie's playing Fortnite, there's that reaction, there's sensor stuff.
Yeah.
But what would but we know that like getting quality reps is important. Let's just say a player is playing NHL 25. Yes, they're not looking at it from front vision, they're looking at it from an aerial view, but there's still some reactionary parameters in that. So is specificity important with someone playing a video game?
I mean, for goalies, I would say yes, because you want to practice very specific kinds of things, right? So if you're playing NHL 25 or whatever, and you got an above view, it's not really simulating very much, unless the players are moving in a very specific system, and then you're getting a little bit of systems exposure. But if you think about like when you play those games, maybe at our age, we're starting to look around at where all the other players are a little bit more. But when we were young, it was like, okay, let me get in there and hopefully another player comes. So they would bring another player into the screen for you to pass to at specific times. Like it's a little less real to me. I would prefer more of a hand-eye type game to either Fortnite or that, something where like a 3D ping pong or 3D tennis, something where you're hitting something back and forth and you have to track it in, and um, or having to coordinate somehow visually getting something into the right space to match. Those would be more the types of games that I would prefer visually. I try to, like I tell my athletes, like hard no phone 2 hours before the game. You shouldn't be on it for more than 20 minutes at a time, generally. If you're on it, your visual system starts to lock up a little bit. So if we're going to be doing some gaming, like very targeted, try and do it beforehand. It doesn't have to be like the Sense Arena type thing where you're actually tracking a puck in, but that wouldn't be a bad one to be doing. It's starting to get your mind into that right mode of, okay, I need to prepare for my game. But something that requires a lot of hand-eye would be my preference. Because we've already at that point worked on the peripheral system to get them ready to play.
You mentioned it. You mentioned Sense Arena or in VR, which was my question. I was trying to lead you into, which is perfect. I haven't used Sense Arena, but the way that I've seen it and the way that I've used the athletes have seen it, I kind of equate it to a similarly effective visualization session where you are recreating a similar situation. You are imagining it, you tracking the puck in. If your visualization is gone well, then you're integrating all five senses and you're trying to make it as realistic as possible. For you as an expert, I know there's Sense Arena on the hockey side, which is the big one, but throughout baseball and other sports, there's a ton of other things. Two-part question is, first, yay, like that's not, I say yay or nay because it's kind of piece by piece, but is there a benefit to an athlete using VR? And if so, like what is the best application with that?
Yeah. You asked me something like this a few years ago and I was like, oh no. It's a, I think the approach that you're taking is correct, like with the visualization. So if you tie what we both do together, I'm a lot on the visual system, you're a lot on the proprioception system, right? What we're trying to do when we're training our athletes is we're trying to tie the visual and the proprioception in. So when you're doing something like Sense Arena, you might be moving your hand to make the save and you might be moving it appropriately, and that's helping the visual system, but you're not getting any tactile feedback of, I made that save properly. You're not getting the puck. I hit the puck with the edge of my glove and not my pocket. You're not getting that exact measurement of how accurate you were. Yes, I made the save. Did I make it the way I want to? So for like a young kid where their primary goal is to get that glove in front of the puck and we haven't mastered the art of catching it yet, yeah, that's probably super helpful for them. Or getting their blocker to the puck and we're not at the level where we're directing it to a certain place in the corner, right? So I think those kinds of things, I think visualization is the right approach to take to what the benefit of those are. It's a good way to complement proper training, but you need the physical feedback in your body. This is how you get a Samsonov type situation where I'm not sure how, and not to pick on the guy, like he's super athletic. He's made it to the NHL. He's a great goalie, but he has a hard time figuring out where he is in space. And when you're in like a Sense Arena type thing, you're losing the physical feedback of, if I push this much, I move this much. And this is how much I need to use my inside edge to get to that spot. So there are some benefits to being able to track like that, but I definitely would not use it alone. To me, it's like a fun complement to the goalie training, but you need that physical feedback along with the visual all the time to understand where you are in space, so you know how much you're pushing, how much movement do I need to get to that spot accurately?
So well, I'm glad to hear that, because that's kind of how I explained it. Because at Christmas time, it was easily the most asked question I got from parents and goalies is, should I get Sensorina? My question is like, well, if it fits in your budget and you're going to use it, sure. Because I'd rather you, in this fits my question, is I'd rather you use it than play Call of Duty. Now, is that an accurate statement, or is that just me not knowing what I'm talking about in terms of, is it better to use like a Sensorina than a Call of Duty, or is it the same? Like, I'm not sure I wouldn't understand.
Yeah. If I had a parent asking me which one would I rather them using at home, I would say probably Sensorina. There are some things, with Sensorina, I don't know, do they do full game simulation?
I don't believe so. I believe it's more drills and stuff at this time.
Yeah. Yeah. So without having the need to improve your peripheral, you're still not, you're complementing your goalie session maybe and using your visual system a little bit, like you say, visualizing, but you're still missing, Call of Duty is honestly not my favorite type of game prep, but it does give you some peripheral awareness. And
but what is your favorite type of game prep? What game are we?
Was my type of, are we talking video or are we talking like just general prep?
Well, yeah, let's just, so in the generality, most people are going to have some sort of gaming system, and not everyone's going to have Sensorina. So if they're going to play a game and they want to get something they enjoy, but something they're going to get a little bit of benefit from, what would that game be?
Great game. Like if you're in a VR type setup, then something like Fruit Ninja would be great. You've got things coming from multiple angles. You have to get them accurately. You're actually watching. If you think of like your stick, like I get a lot of goalies come in because they're not stopping pucks from outside the blue line. Like that's a very common reason that I end up seeing people. And it's not always because they can't see you at the blue line. Sometimes they need glasses, or we would fit them in contacts at that point. But or it's okay. But they're not tracking the puck into their stick. So playing games like that where they actually have to visually track something in accurately. Again, I'll go back to the 3D ping pong and the 3D tennis and 3D anything with a ball that you have to catch or stop in the game, to me, is going to simulate a lot of what we do in a hockey game. If there's something coming at you, that's going to simulate what it's like in hockey. With Fortnite or Call of Duty, sorry, you're moving through space and you're looking for guys, but you're never looking for a teammate. You're not looking for somebody to pass it to. You're looking for like kind of a point of attack. We want things that are changing in depth a lot, because that's really the way the game is played. It's a lot of things happening far, things happening close, things changing close to us, and how are we going to react appropriately to that? So those are more the kinds of games I would recommend if you're doing some video gaming.
So I talked in this podcast the last couple of days that like my new hobby is developing defensemen. So I know we always talk about goalies, right? Like we're goalie guys. I bring my son to you. But in terms of your training, in terms of like your testing and all of this stuff, how can you help and aid defensemen? Because it's a different position than goaltending. But same thing, like kind of everything you're saying, I can correlate it back to like how I'm going to train D. But for anybody who's listening to this that is a defenseman or a forward, how else can you help those athletes also?
Yeah, so I played like both defense and forward in junior. I was, Paul Coffey was my idol. So it was a lot of up and down and back and forth. So to me, it's integrating some of the hockey things that we do along with getting our visual system up. Again, I'm going to jump into the periphery. Jamie, are you still there?
I'm still there. Are you still there?
Yeah. Okay. Sorry. Derek froze. So I just want to make sure that we were still running before he kept talking. So for me, a defenseman, the visual demands are different, right? A goalie's ideally never going to have somebody behind him that he needs to worry about. He's never going to be picking a puck up off the boards, worrying about getting schmucked from the other side. He's not going to be skating up the ice, usually taking a pass and giving a pass and worrying about people are around them. So with defensemen, what we need, or defensemen and forwards really, I'll tailor the training into individual positioning. I had one player who was in the Hurricanes farm system as well at the time. He had one eye that didn't work as well, so he wanted to train that. But his main complaint was he was having trouble scoring from certain ways. He couldn't see where the puck was going to go when he would make a move coming from a certain position. So for him, we actually had to train him. And once I realized what was going on, if he was coming up the left wing and cutting across center, he wasn't seeing where the defenseman was at all because his visual system was blocking that part of the game out. So we had to retrain that for him. And the way we do that is we use hockey skills while we're doing our visual training. So there is, forget what the company is, hockeyshot.com, I think. Sorry, I have no financial interest or affiliation. You can cut that out if you want. There are websites that make gameplay pads for stick handling on the ground. So I use those a lot. One of them looks like a crease. The player stands at the base of the crease, and then there are a bunch of dots at different points around, and then there are different stick handling maneuvers that we have them do. So I'll have them do a lot of hand work and stick work in different directions: push, pull, flip, forehand, backhand, back and forth. And I'll have them do that. I'll teach them how to do that first. I'll get their hands going, and then I'll add a different visual component where they'll have to be heads up and reading things or doing different visual activities, identifying. This is the Connor McDavid stuff where they're doing all of their hands drills still down bottom because they've practiced it enough that they can do it, and they can use their proprioception, use what they're feeling in their hands to tell where the puck is on their stick. And they're doing a visual activity that's heads up. So it might be having a couple of fit lights where the fit lights might be on the ice at first. So they've got to be stick handling and then tap a fit light to turn it off. But we don't want to keep it down on the ice because then we're training that player to keep his head down all the time. So as we're doing our training, we're bringing their head up so that they're, number one, not going to get hurt. Number two, when you got your head up and your hands are working at full speed, then you can see what's going on around you. You know, is there somebody coming at me? How much time do I have? Now I'm processing how quickly everybody's moving, so I really know how much time I have. I know my line mates. I know how fast they can skate. So I know that even though I can't see Jim because he's behind me, Jim is going to be at the blue line right now because I'm at the red line, and that's how fast he skates. And I know that he likes to come up with the play. So when I go wide, he's going to get to the top of the circle if I go behind the net. So those really top end guys have put all that together, and that's how they know, where guys are going to be. But we train that. We train the head up. We train the peripheral awareness. We still are training the hand-eye, some of it in similar ways to our goalies, but, I'll have players bring sticks in. That the ball toss game that we did, I would maybe use bean bags and have them do a deflection drill so that we're throwing bean bags at them. The bean bags have numbers on them, and they have to read the number on the bean bag and deflect it. At first, it's just getting the deflection. Once they can do that, then it's deflecting it in a certain direction. So forehand deflection, backhand deflection. So I'm teaching guys how to pull a deflection and how to push a deflection, how to push it up, how to push it down. So now as they get better at that, your higher level players, they're going to be able to use their peripheral vision to see where the goalie is at the same time. So now a guy's taking a shot, he's using his peripheral vision, goalie's down already, I'm going to deflect up. Okay. So you start with the easy, and then you build from there. But the first thing is you need the skill, just like with my goalies. They need to have the skill to be able to translate the visual system into integrating it with their skills.
You had mentioned and we're getting close to the end here, but you had mentioned Jordan Binnington. You had some qualms today with what's going on in the Four Nations. Let's hear it. Let's get it off your chest. We're an educational podcast, and so we can help educate the masses, and we use NHL goalies as an example. Let's hear it.
So anybody who's been trained by Bojan knows he's kind of particular, right? You got to be square, right? So when I see Binnington spinning, the guy's shooting at him from straight ahead, and he's turning his body sideways, and he's stopping it with his pad that's laid down sideways. I'm like, how do we get to a point where the Canadian goalie is moving like that? Like that's kind of a question I have for you guys. Like, how do we get to a point where we don't have somebody who's square to the puck, who understands that once they're square to the puck, they can react from there and they don't have to contort and get out of position and open up holes in between their feet. The goal that was in the first goal in the American game, kind of went right through him, right? He was a little bit late dropping. How big is Bennington? I don't know. Is he a smaller goalie?
No, he's like 6'2"-ish, I think. 6'2", 6'3".
So in that play, is there any reason he shouldn't have already been down on his butterfly at that point? With his pads locked and his stick down, like with how deep that shot was? Like, I think it came from below the hash marks, out wide, and there was nobody backdoor. Like, for most goalies,
I don't remember the clip, and I was 9 beers in, so I can't comment.
Yeah. It went right through him, and when it went through him, you could see his reaction was, "Oh man, I was late getting down." So yeah, there's a little bit of reaction time. There's a little bit of processing speed there. But like when I see him, he seems to over push a bit. Seems to struggle with where he is in space. And sorry, I had your palm in my face there for about 3 minutes. Your frame froze. So he seems to struggle with where he is in his crease a little bit. He seems to struggle with staying square. And to me, those are part of the same problem. Like, he's not using his visual cues to orient himself to where he is in space. He's not judging how far away the shooter was to understand that he was in so tight that if he's in his butterfly, the shooter didn't really have too many options at that point. If he's shooting high, you're probably catching it with your shoulders. If he's shooting low, you need to be down low already. But there were several times like he's spinning. To me, a goalie should never be going in a circle. Pretty much ever. Like that's unless somebody bumps you and you get twisted out, there's a way to stay square. Part of that, I didn't get to, but part of it is one of the things that a lot of parents and goalie coaches and things will struggle with is depth, right? So goalies understanding how deep they need to be in the crease. And when we're trying to push depth forward in certain situations, like Colin was one of them, he liked to play really deep in his crease. And it's like, Colin, if you just get a little bit further out, you get much bigger. But what I realized over time was that he was getting deep in his crease so that he could see where his crease was. So that he could orient himself to be square. Colin was always super square. That was one of his biggest strengths. He was very structurally sound, but he played deeper in his crease. And what kind of cued that to me is when we would play in a rink that had ringette, so they have the second crease out there, Colin was always at the top of the regular crease when he should have been. So he then adjusted his depth properly because he had the visual cue to say, am I square or not? Right? So Jamie, one of the things that we worked with you was when you go into different rinks, actually looking from spot to spot on the rink to get your brain oriented to how much is that spacing. We're doing our Hellebuck, if you will, or I don't think that's exactly what he's doing, but we're using our visual system to move our eyes and understand. We're kind of training our brain before our game. How big is the spacing in this rink? So I think, incorporating more of that into the goalies, and it's hard because you guys aren't in their practices for that, but teaching them how to use their visual system just when they're in a rink to say, okay, this is how much it feels like to go from the corner up to the blue line corner, up to the far blue line corner. There's a neck movement, there's a head movement. Getting them into those habits will help them respond to their space better. Do you guys think, both of you, question for you, if and you guys have both done a ton of reps, if I put you on your left post and I blindfolded you, could you push up to the top right corner of the crease, push to the top left corner of the crease, and then push back to your right post? If you did it 10 times, how many times do you think you'd hit that right post?
Every time.
Every time. And I use that as an example of I do things like that with my eyes closed to show to my goalies like why it's important. that to learn these things, then why I can't force feed them their angles. I can only correct when they're adjusted and make them do it again, so they figure out where they are in space.
Right. So important. So like with a goalie like that, like Bennington, who tends to get lost, who tends to get turned and off the puck, I would do that kind of training with him, heavy reps, but add some visual cues to him. I want you to look here and then push. You know, when you guys have your young kids, a lot of it is look, then push. This is where you're going to go, right? Now, we don't want a goalie looking down at the crease to push, because then that means that they're not looking up at the game. But in the initial stages, we might need to do those kinds of things and get those reps in so that they understand what their spacing is. Samsonov too, if you did that with him, I bet he'd be 3 out of 10. His visual spacing is off a bit. And that's something that sometimes it's actually a visual alignment issue. Sometimes it's a visual processing issue, but both of those things can be trained.
Well, Doctor, thank you very much for joining us on the podcast. I have so many questions here that we didn't get to, but we'll have to bring you on later, especially towards the start of the off season. I think that's good because integrating a lot of this stuff is going to be ultra important for off season training. But where can people find you, reach out to you if they want to get in contact, they want to learn more, if they want to get in the clinic and start to make these changes?
So our website is miltonvisionoptometry.com. If you want to email us, maybe you can put a link up to my email there. DRC, Dr. C. Akerman, AKERMAN @gmail.com. That'll come straight to me. Or info@miltonvisionoptometry.com is more likely to get a prompt response because the staff will be on me.
Perfect. Well, thanks again. I'll link all of this in the show notes, the YouTube description, so that you can have it. Looking forward to asking some more questions and picking your brain another time. And we'll see everyone in the next episode.
That's awesome. Thanks, guys.